The bus was already packed when Rakesh stepped on, his school bag clutched tightly to his chest like a shield. The sun hadn't even risen fully, but Colombo's streets were already alive. Vendors setting up stalls, sleepy rickshaw drivers waiting for passengers, and the morning rush slowly building. Rakesh squeezed in near the window, his back pressed against the metal, trying to balance without falling. He was 15, tired, and hungry. He hadn't had breakfast. Again, his mother had simply said, "Save the last roti for your sister." Rakesh didn't argue. He never did. His father had left when he was 8. No explanation, no letters, not even a memory strong enough to be angry at. Since then, it had always been Rakesh, his mother, and his little sister Neha, living in a one-room home tucked behind a flour mill where the walls shook every time the machines were on. Yet despite it all, Rakesh never missed school. He couldn't afford tuition. He couldn't afford fancy shoes. But he carried a mind sharper than most and a hunger for change that went deeper than his stomach. Each day, he'd write quotes on the back of his notebook, ones he heard in class or read from borrowed books. His favorite was, "Where you start doesn't decide where you'll finish." He believed that. He had to. One evening, while returning from school, he found a group of his friends playing cricket. They called him in, laughing, teasing. He smiled but shook his head. Instead, he sat on a broken bench under a banyan tree, opened his notebook, and began to study. He knew every second counted. One of the boys shouted, "Tu topper benega kia? You think you become a topper?" Rakesh looked up and said softly, "Not just a topper. I'll change my entire life." They laughed, but he didn't. Years passed. Rakesh worked part-time after school, washing dishes at a roadside cafe, delivering groceries, even sweeping the temple floor in the early morning hours. He never complained. Every rupee earned went to books or his sister's education. When he cleared his 12th with top marks, the principal called him in. "You've done what many kids with money couldn't. But what next?" Rakesh replied, "I want to become a chartered accountant." The principal paused. "You'll need coaching. An exam isn't easy." "I know," Rakesh said, "but I don't need easy. I need possible." And so began the hardest years of his life. By day, he worked in a textile go down. By night, he studied. Sometimes he fell asleep with his head on his books, pen still in hand. There were failures. He missed his first CA attempt by 8 marks. He didn't cry. He studied harder. Second attempt, fail. Third attempt, fail. But in his fourth, he passed. That moment, when he saw his name on the list, he didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply looked at his mother and said, "We did it, Ma." From there, Rakesh's life changed. He began working at a reputed firm. Eventually, he helped fund his sister's medical degree. And years later, he returned to school, not as a student, but as a guest speaker. Standing on that old stage, he looked at the new generation of dreamers and said, "You don't need to be rich to succeed. You just need to stay hungry long enough." Rakesh stepped down from the stage to a thunderous applause that shook the old school hall. Some teachers had tears in their eyes. Teachers who once gave him chalk, extra notebooks, and meals on the sly. One of them walked up to him afterward and said, "I always knew you'd do something big, but not like this." He smiled and replied, "Even I didn't. I just kept walking." That day, something in him shifted, not because of the applause, not even because of the success, but because he realized something deeper. His story wasn't alone anymore. It belonged to every boy who skipped lunch, every girl who stayed up late studying by candlelight, every dreamer who walked to school barefoot. And so he started writing. Not novels, not lectures, just small posts online. Stories of his failures, his insecurities, his journey. He called the series Barefoot to Balance Sheet. Slowly, people began to notice. Students across Sri Lanka started following his posts, messaging him, asking how to stay motivated. He didn't have fancy words, but he had honesty. Soon, he began holding free evening classes at a community center. No fees, no uniform, just a few benches, a whiteboard, and fire in the hearts of those who attended. His only rule? Leave your excuses at the door. In 2 years, over 300 students passed through his mentorship. One night, after a long session, a girl named Samira stayed back. She was shy, nervous, barely able to look up. "Sir," she said, "what if I fail again?" Rakesh looked her in the eyes and said gently, "Then you'll try again. Failing is not the end. Quitting is." Those words stayed with her. She passed her entrance exam the next year. And she wasn't alone. Rakesh's classes became a movement. He called it Project Rise, because he believed everyone, no matter how broken, could rise. One day, a corporate CEO who had read his blog post offered him a speaking slot at a national education summit. Rakesh hesitated. He wasn't comfortable in suits. He wasn't polished. But something in him said, "Do it." On the day of the event, he stood backstage watching well-dressed speakers talk about policy, funding, data. He felt out of place until it was his turn. He walked up to the podium, took a deep breath, and began, "I don't have a fancy degree. I don't speak perfect English. I don't even own a car. But I do have something many don't: perspective." He spoke about failure, hunger, and how success tastes best when you've earned every grain. By the end, the hall was silent. And then, standing ovation. That speech went viral. From government leaders to local NGOs, everyone wanted to partner with him. But he had one condition: "I'll work with you only if we don't forget the ones at the bottom." And he meant it. He built free skill centers in underdeveloped areas, teaching accounting, computer skills, and communication to youth who were often ignored. Many of his students were former dropouts, laborers, domestic workers, people the world had given up on. But Rakesh saw gold in them. One boy, Armin, used to wash cars. Today, he runs a successful bookkeeping agency. Another, Priya, used to fold clothes at a garment shop. Today, she manages accounts for 3 local stores. Rakesh didn't give them success. He showed them the path. They walked it, and he never forgot where he came from. Despite the fame, the awards, and the growing recognition, he still returned to that small cafe where he once washed dishes. Sometimes he sat there quietly, sipping chai, watching the younger workers and thinking, "I was you once, and you can be me." At 30, he was offered a national award. He accepted it not for himself, but for his mother. She stood on stage beside him, tears in her eyes. The weight of years finally lifted. In his speech, he said, "People often ask me how I did it. The answer is simple. I didn't wait for perfect. I started with pain." Today, Rakesh continues his mission, quietly, relentlessly. He still teaches, still writes, still shows up for people who feel invisible, because he knows what it's like to be invisible. He believes one thing more than anything: greatness isn't born. It's built, one small choice at a time. And every time he sees a student struggling, he remembers that 15-year-old boy on the bus, hungry, tired, scared, but holding on to one thing: a dream,